Alright, hello 7th grade. So today we're looking at fair and unfair games, and if you're looking in the book, you might notice there is not a section 9-8. The reason there's not a section 9-8 is because this is where, if we were in class, I would normally go and we would play some, fun little probability games, but we're not in class, so we can't really do that, so we're going to be looking at a couple of games instead and figuring out whether they're fair or unfair. So, for the purposes of what we're doing right now, we're going to call it fair if everyone has an equal chance of winning. So whether there are 2 people or 3 people or 4 people playing, if everyone has an equal chance to win, it's a fair game. If not, it's not. Makes sense. Okay, so for a basic example of what would be a fair game is if we flip a, regular two-sided coin, and A wins if it comes out heads, and player B wins if it comes out tails. Okay, it's not a very exciting game, but I think we could all agree that that's a fair game, because this person has a 50% or 1 out of 2 chance of winning. This person has a 1 out of 2 chance of winning. So it's a fair game, it's just not a very exciting game that you would probably want to play too many times, but it is fair. And that's what we're interested in. We're not interested in how exciting the game is. We're interested in, is it fair or not? And that one, yeah, that's fair. And again, we're assuming here that any coins we're flipping or any dice that we're rolling are fair coins, fair dice, and they're not loaded. Okay. Now, this one. We're flipping 2 coins. And player A wins if they're both heads, player B wins if they're both tails, and player C wins if there's one of each. So if there's either a heads and a tails or a tails and a head, C wins. A wins both heads, B wins if they're both tails, C wins if there's one of each. Is that fair or not? Because if we're just looking at that, those are your 3 options, right? Either they're both heads, they're both tails, or they're not. But if we look at the actual probability of those options happening, if we look at our things that could happen, if I flip 2 coins, I could either get heads and heads, or I could get tails and tails, or I could get heads and tails, but I could also get tails and heads. So if we're looking at those, and we look at who wins, if we have our heads and heads, sorry, that looks like an A there, that's an H. If we have our heads and heads, A wins. If we have our tails and tails, B wins. If we have heads and tails, C wins. Ooh, but C also wins if we have tails and heads. So C has a bigger chance of winning because 2 out of those 4 things are C wins rather than A or B wins. So we got 1/2 here, should let myself some more room, as opposed to 1/4 and 1/4 for both A and B. So that one's not fair because C has a bigger chance of winning. Even though if you're just looking at it, it might go, okay, well, you can get this, this, or this, but those probabilities aren't 1/3. Actually, 1/4 and 1/4 and 1/2. Okay, so we're still flipping 2 coins over here. And A wins if they're both heads or both tails, and B wins if there's one of each. So we got the same options. We can either get heads and heads, heads and tails, tails and heads, or tails and tails. But this time, A wins if it's one of these 2. B wins if it's one of these 2. So now it's back to 1/2 and 1/2. So that one's fair. Even though if you're just looking at that, you could go, well, A wins if it's 2 things, one of each, that's just one thing, that's not fair. But heads and tails could happen 2 ways. It could either be heads and tails, or tails and heads, so that counts as 2 different things to go with these 2 different things that could happen here. So that one's fair. And that one wasn't. So that's an unfair game. Cool. Okay. Now, let's take a look. Let's say we got 2 dice instead. So we got 2 dice instead of 2 coins, and player A wins if the sum is even, player B wins if the sum is odd, so we're adding them. And player A wins if you add them and get something even, player B wins if you add them and get something odd. Okay. So, if I've got 2 dice, instead of thinking about this as I could get a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and I could get a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, since we're just talking about even and odd here, I'm going to say I could roll it and get an even or roll it and get an odd because we have just as many even numbers as odd numbers. Again, assuming a dice are fair and going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I've either got even and even, or I've got even and odd, and I've got odd and even, or I've got odd and odd. Those are my four things that could happen as far as evens and odds if I roll two dice. Now, there are more things that could happen if you think about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but all of those things are either this, 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 or this, and we have an equal chance of those things happening. Now, the question is, what happens when I add them? So if you add two even numbers, what do you get? Hopefully I said an even number. It's like if you add 4 and 6, you get 10, that's still even. So any two even numbers, you add them, you get something even. What happens if I add an even number and an odd number? Hopefully you said you get an odd number. Because if we have like 4 that's even and 5 that's odd, 4 and 5 gives you 9, that's odd. And same sort of thing if we have an odd and then an even, because if we're adding, order doesn't matter. And if I have an odd number plus an odd number, and it looks like Miguel's wearing glasses down there now, so if I have an odd number plus an odd number, I get an even number. Like if you have 3 plus 3, you get 6, that's even. Okay, so if we're looking at who wins here, player A wins if the sum is even, so A wins here and here. B wins if it is odd, so B wins here and here. So they've both got a half and half chance of winning, so this is another fair game. Yay. Nice and fair. Again, not terribly exciting. Most of these games aren't like terribly exciting games, but we're just looking at are they fair or not. Alright. This time we're rolling 2 dice and multiplying them. And A wins if the product is even, B wins if the product is odd. So we've still got our four things that could happen. I could have either even and odd and even, odd and odd. But this time we're multiplying instead. And at first it's not going to look a whole lot different. Because if we take an even number times an even number, like if I take 6 times 8, that's 48. That's still even. You won't get an 8 on a dice anyway. But anyway, so that would still be even. If I take an even number times an odd number, like if I take 4 times 3, that's also even. And the same thing if I take an odd number times an even number, because again, if we're multiplying, just like if we're adding, order doesn't matter. So it doesn't matter if I take 4 times 3 or 3 times 4, that's still going to give me an even number, because that's 12. And if you've noticed already, we've got 3 E's, so this one's probably not very fair. But an odd number times an odd number does give me an odd number, so B has at least a chance of winning, but it's not a very big chance, because we've got 3 out of 4 things are even, and 1 out of those 4 things is odd, so that's definitely unfair. And it's a very unfair game. Sad face there. Unfair game. Okay, let's do one more. Alright, this time we want to roll 2 dice and add them, and player A wins if they add up to 6, 7, or 8. B wins if it's anything else. So if they add them and get 12, or 11, or 3, or so. Anything that's not 6, 7, or 8, B wins. Okay, so this time I can't just say even and odd and even, because it matters what exactly those numbers are. So I'm going to go back to that little thing we drew in class one time, where we said we could have my first die over here, my second die over here, and then we're just going to make a little table of all the possible things that could happen. And hopefully I'm going to leave myself enough room here. Okay, close enough. There we go. Because if I'm looking at my first dice, I could either get a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, or I could go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 over here. And then we're interested in what happens if we add them. So I'm just going to go through and figure out, well, if I add a 1 and a 1, I've got a 2. 1 and 2, I've got a 3. And so on. 2 and 1 is 3. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And if you happen to notice that once you've got your first number, your numbers are just counting up, you can save yourself a little bit of time. That was a kind of messy 8 there. Okay, so 3 and 1 is 4. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 4 and 1 is 5. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 5 and 1 is 6. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 6 and 1 is 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And then what I'm interested in is out of those, and 6 times 6 is 36. So out of those 36 things, I want to know how many of those are 6s, 7s, or 8s. So I've got 6, 7, 6, 7, 8, 6, 7, 8, 6, 7, 8, 6, 7, 8, 7, 8. Okay, so I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. I've got 16 out of my 36 things that are 6, 7, or 8, which means I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 20 things that aren't. Now, you could also have gotten that 20 by taking 30 minus that 16. Okay, so not quite fair, but quite a bit closer than our other unfair games were. So still a bit unfair, but not as skewed as the last one. Because 16 and 20, okay, that's kind of close. As opposed to our last thing was 1/4 and 3/4, which wasn't close at all. That's like 25% and 75%. That's not close at all. This is at least a little bit closer. So if we wanted to make that a bit more fair, we can maybe also give A wins if like 2 and 12. Is what we get, because I would bump that up to 18 things. So we could tweak this a little bit and make it more fair, but as it is right now, nope, not fair. B is more likely to win. Okay, so for the homework, since there aren't pages in the book, I went ahead and stuck a link to a Google Doc in the description below with some questions, and what we're doing is we're just figuring out, is this game fair or not, and if it's not fair, who's more likely to win, and those instructions are also in the Google Doc. Don't write in the Google Doc. The way I have it set up, you shouldn't be able to anyway, but either make a copy of it and write in your answers there, or you can just write them down on a separate piece of paper, and same idea as before, either email me that Google Doc back, or take a picture of it and email me that, or you could come and drop it off when your parents come to drop off your younger sibling and stuff. That works too. And I will see you in the next video.